If you could describe radical acceptance and self-care in one word, phrase, or mantra, what would it be?
I would say freedom. Freedom, because that is what I've been feeling since 4 years ago when I finally decided. And I say decided because for a long time it felt like it was a survival piece, but then me choosing to really embrace myself and allow myself to be me, it was the most freeing moment. And that's how I continue to feel. I feel free. I don't feel like I am existing or living or doing for anyone else, but for myself, with the intention and the hope that there are also other people who get inspired and who also connect and who also feel seen through that work that I'm doing.
Welcome, queer kittens and new earballs. I'm V, a two-spirit human, joy influencer, energy worker, and dad joke connoisseur. All pronouns accepted. This podcast started because we just want QTBIPOC to be well, to feel seen, and to be heard. So let this be your queer compass guiding you towards radical acceptance. And wherever you are in your wellness journey, just know you're not alone. We hope this podcast brings you joy where you'll learn, laugh, heal, and grow. On this episode, we are deep diving into the whole purpose of this podcast, and that's finding our true, authentic selves through radical acceptance. And for those of you new earballs that haven't been with us and know what radical acceptance is, I mean, you heard in the beginning of the episode, how Luis sees radical acceptance is liberation and freedom. Everyone sees it differently. As for me, I see it as letting go of control and accepting those really hard things that you just don't want to accept. And it helps me remove myself out of anger. This is why it's an important topic, because it's the actions we need to take for ourselves. This ain't for nobody else, y'all. It is for yourself first and foremost. And through the last 2 years of interviewing so many different types of humans in this community, we're realizing the closer you get to radical acceptance of just in general and as a whole, it flows onto yourself. It flows onto others. And you get away from that narrative in your mind that's not even yours. Like Bob Marley once said, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. We are here trying to do it together, and lucky for you, we are going to have today Luis Cornejo, who is a professional in relationship dynamics with yourself and others, and is a certified marriage and sex therapist. And just gonna brag about him a little bit. He's also a model and a podcast host of Queer Magic. And we're just gonna be going through the difficulties that come with unlearning and how all those dynamics work. We're even gonna jump into some religious trauma. So trigger warning if y'all need that. And we've created a special segment just for Luis, so y'all can find out some green flags and some red flags to watch out for on some of these new connections, old connections, just all your connections. So without further ado, here's Luis.
Hello, everyone. My name is Luis Cornejo, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, certified sex therapist, and I am the owner of Psychosocial Therapy, a fully virtual practice in California, where I specialize in working with queer and BIPOC folks. I'm also the owner of Queer Magic Entertainment, LLC, where I have my own podcast, Queer Magic, where I talk a lot about self-expression, queer-related issues, and also empowerment. And I recently launched my Queer Magic candle as part of my ongoing brand expansion, but also really a way to create more representation, more visibility, and to put a little more magic out there in the world. I am first generation Indigenous and Latinx. So my family is originally from Guatemala and Mexico, and my pronouns are he, they, and I am a Cancer.
I read in your bio that you're from Los Angeles?
I am, yes, originally born and raised in Inglewood, California.
I was your neighbor. I grew up in Pico Rivera.
Okay, yeah, close by.
Yeah. When did you come to the Bay Area?
So I left home when I turned 18, right after high school. I was like, you know what, this is my chance to get out there. And coming from a very religious and conservative home, I felt that it was going to be a very important part of my growth to be able to explore, right, and be somewhere where I could learn more about myself, but also have a little bit of space, I think, between me and my family, which I was very close to, but also wasn't really able to be myself a lot of times around. And so left at 18 and I went to school at Cal State East Bay, which was Cal State Hayward when I first started, and pretty much stayed up there back like on and off. I think total, I lived there for maybe 12 plus years. And then I recently moved to LA last year to come back home, basically. So, I mean, I spent a lot of time up there and then back in LA and always pulled to both sides.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I have yet to move back to LA. I've still been up here in the Bay. I too, at 18, left high school and my family was religious and I got into like a Catholic university. So they're like, if you get in here, you should go here. And not knowing my professors were queer and, you know, it was very open and liberal Catholic school. And found myself. And speaking of that space and that time that you took for yourself in the Bay Area, walk us through a little bit of like how you came closer to yourself by moving yourself further from your family.
So I just want to say I love the Bay Area. Honestly, when I got up there, I felt like I had gone to a completely different world, which is so funny because it's only, 6 hours away in car and like 50 minutes on a flight. But honestly, to me, it felt like a whole world away because I had never been far from home. I had never been on my own. And I think it was kind of almost like a culture shock, but also a very pivotal part of my development, you know, as a person, because it was the first time that I actually started to feel safe enough to explore who I was. And at that time, you know, I think for me, acknowledging that I identified as a gay man was in itself almost, how do I put this? It was new because I had never actually really embraced it. I think before that, like high school and all of that, like I had already known, but it wasn't something that I shared, or it wasn't something where I was already, you know, dating. Like I didn't start dating until I actually got to college because I couldn't, right? It wasn't like something that I had an opportunity to do. And so when I got there, I was like, oh my gosh, like I have all of this freedom. There's all of these people who are my age who live together. And so it was pretty wild, I would say. I have a lot of stories from my freshman year of college, you know, me coming in as this more conservative, but also very new to so many things, right? Like even just the idea of diversity, right? I grew up in Inglewood, which was predominantly Black and Latino. I went to an all-white high school that I went on a permit in LA as well. And so there was a bit of exposure, but I think for me, because it was always just go to school, go home, I was never exposed to different foods or even like different languages or a lot of these things. And so going up to the Bay Area where it's super diverse was like, oh my gosh, like there's all of these new things and everything just felt so exciting. And then also like making friends, but it wasn't like home, you know, where, hey, I'm going to go out to see a friend. It was like, no, like you lived with all of these people, right, in the dorms, and like you hung out and you went to class and, you know, you kind of were responsible for yourself. And one of the things that keeps coming up to mind right now as I was sharing this was I remember the first time I had to do laundry on my own because I was so used to my mom doing laundry because she was like the homemaker. That was like her thing. Like she wouldn't let us do it. It wasn't like she, you know, we didn't want to. She was just very much I'm the mom, I'm gonna do all this, and this for you, very traditional. And so when I got up there, I remember putting all my clothes in to wash and then dry. And when they came out, they were like the tiniest thing. And I basically had no clothes to wear. And I remember having to like figure out, what am I going to do? And at that time too, like getting financial aid to me was like, oh my gosh, I have, money. Like I'm going to go shopping. All of these little things that you don't think about because you're still a kid and you're thrown out there and you're like given all these freedoms. And most of us, like it's the first time. I think I learned so many things just that first year around like spending habits, around connecting with people, around other cultures, around like time management. I mean, all of that just kind of being thrown into it. But it was definitely a learning experience. I would say it was probably the first time that I felt like an adult and was being treated more so like an adult than I was when I was home. And so in that sense, it was definitely very liberating. But I will say, I think the hardest part was the social part. I actually started dating. I had met other queer folks, which I was not around at all. At least we never shared it when I was in high school. If I did know someone, it was almost like other people didn't know, or it was kind of like there people were more open. That was the first thing I noticed, that people were a lot more open about it. I was able to connect with other folks. I did go on a lot of awkward dates because I had never dated before. And so basically just kind of learned about myself that first year. And then through that, the intro to me really embracing myself as a queer person. And it started off, like I said, as a gay man, like this is very much around sexuality versus like actual identity. And I think I didn't really understand a lot of these concepts. And even using the word gay to me was still felt so negative because I had come from a place where we didn't really talk about it, but when we did, it was in a very negative way. And so kind of having to unlearn that and also make mistakes, I think was a big part of me really growing that first year of college.
What was it that helped you unlearn those things to build like a healthier relationship with yourself?
What really helped me unlearn it were, I'm going to say, as bad as it sounds now, looking back, was a lot of the mistakes I made around, I think, hiding myself, or even the heartbreak, or even the avoidance, because those were the moments where I realized that me not being myself was causing me more harm than good. It worked for a long time when I was home because I was in survival mode. I had to do it. I had to keep a lot of things to myself. I had to learn how to not always be upfront, or also who I could trust and who I couldn't trust, what to share, what not to share. But then when I got to college, it didn't work as well because you can't connect in an intimate level with people if you're not able to be vulnerable, right? Or even able to really be in a space where you're open to it. And so I think for me, that was one of the harder lessons, was realizing that I didn't make a lot of deep relationships or even in dating because I was still not really, I think, in the space where I guess I'm going to say where I didn't really love that part of myself. It was a part that I understood, that I knew, but it wasn't something that I felt good about because I had spent so much time being given these mixed messages about my sexuality, about my femininity, about who I was as an individual, that I learned to close it down and keep myself from really embracing it. And so I quickly realized that not being yourself, not really showing up authentically, didn't really foster a lot of connection, mostly pushed people away or just kept things at very surface levels. And so I think that for me, that was kind of what I would say helped me the most, was seeing how that didn't help and then really wanting to connect and have deeper relationships.
I totally can agree with you on that, because I think before I embraced my two-spirit nature, I think that I was very like depressed and kind of like anxious in social spots because I was just kind of like, who should I bring to this event today? Yeah. Because every time I change myself to accommodate those around me instead of just taking up space with exactly who I am. And which leads me, like, how did you find that authentic, that like person that you were proud to be?
Yeah, that took a long time. I mean, I will say that it wasn't until recently, maybe 3-4 years ago now, where that happened. Most of my 20s and my college years and even in grad school, I think, doing that work to get to the place I'm at now. That was probably the introduction, right? Realizing that not being myself wasn't fostering connection and going through a lot of heartbreak, but then going into like grad school and having to start my own therapy process as a requirement to me becoming a therapist was probably the piece where everything got fast tracked. I had never been to therapy before. I wanted to be a therapist because I wanted to help other people, but also because a lot of my experiences where I never got that support that I needed. And I never talked about any of these things with anyone because I learned from the get-go that it wasn't safe. The first time I tried to tell one of my parents, they didn't react very well. When I tried to talk to people in the church, they would tell me not to say anything or to pray. So it was always received in a very negative way. And therapy was probably the first space where I went and I didn't feel judged. I was able to talk about these things. And I mean, it wasn't like right that first session. It took almost like 5-6 months before my therapist was like, I noticed that you're always trying to get to a certain place, but you always back away. And I can't help you if you don't feel safe or if you don't trust me. And I remember just thinking like I knew what was happening because I could feel my body and mind literally resisting for a lot of reasons. One, because I had never shared it with anyone, right, that openly. Two, because I was really scared of what it meant to actually accept it and embrace it. And three, because I still internally thought there was something wrong with me. I was about 20. How old was I? I was like mid-20s, I think, when I was going through this process, or late 20s. And so for me, like I always consider myself a late bloomer in a lot of these areas, even a late bloomer queer who embraced it a lot later on, even though they were always there, right? It was always a part of me. And I know that because I saw so many examples throughout my life of the real me wanting to shine through and be seen, but always being pushed back because it wasn't safe. It didn't feel like I could do that. And so that first therapy experience in grad school really shifted that for me to where I started to acknowledge what I'm still working on today, which is really healing from a lot of the religious trauma that I experienced and how it affected me, not just in how I saw myself, but also how I embraced and engaged with others around me and my environment and the world. And so going to therapy, I mean, that was just the first therapist. I've gone to therapy since then. I mean, it's been about like 8 years, maybe 10 years. And I've had different therapists at different times in my life for different reasons. And all of them have really created a space for me to learn more and more about myself. I'm even in therapy right now. This is actually the first time I have a therapist who also identifies as queer, who's Indigenous, who's also a model like I am. And so it's been healing in that way, just to be able to see someone that looks like me, that does a lot of the same work that I do, and that also understands me in this way. And, before that, I mostly had therapists who were women, therapists who were gay men. And this is the first time someone that identifies as queer and also shares pronouns. I mean, a lot of things in common. And it's been, I think for me, so healing to go through all of these different experiences with different folks, each of them offering me something that I didn't know I needed at the time, but it's all played a part in my own healing, in my own process. And so, like I said, for me, it was probably 4 years ago during the pandemic, right at the beginning, I, like everyone else, had so much time on my hands of being home and sitting with a lot of different pieces, right? My career as a therapist and working at Kaiser, my relationship, my physical health, and realizing that a lot of these things were not really aligned. And I wasn't happy. I was told that I was pre-diabetic, which was something that my family always made a big deal because our family, a lot of them have diabetes. And so it was always like this almost like shameful thing for them, like, don't get it. And so at that time, being pre-diabetic, not being happy at my job, the pandemic going on, I mean, so many things, I just was not happy. And I was still very much really holding myself back to where I sometimes like share with people photos because they'll see what I was like back then to where I'm at now. They're like, oh my gosh, like that was a huge change. You look so different. And I tell them, yeah, this is when I was really still trying so hard to fit into a narrative and into these ideas and expectations that other people had for me. And you can see it. You can see how unhappy I was. You can see how reserved I was, even in my sweater vest and my, my tie to like where people, not that that's not, for everyone, but for me, knowing myself now and where I'm at, and when people see me in my fashion, because I love fashion, I'm usually in ruffles or wearing my makeup or doing something, people will see that they usually use the term you're glowing and, glowing. And I think for a long time I struggled with that because I don't dislike or even hate that other version of me. I think I look back with a lot of grief and also a lot of empathy, because I know that version of me was trying so hard to really fit in and to be accepted, because they felt like that was the only way they were going to be able to get love. And then having to unlearn that and realize that, you know what? No, that's not the only way. All you're doing is you're taking every little piece of yourself for everyone else, and you feel so empty because you don't have anything left for you. And so it was in that moment where I remember just a certain sequence of events, stuff at work that just was not working out. I was not happy. I was crying every day at the thought of going to work. I didn't like the environment. I didn't like a lot of things that were going on with my manager at the time, the health stuff, and they weren't being supported. My parents got COVID. There was just so much stuff going on that I think that was like the moment for me of something has to change. I ended up leaving my job, and almost like an instinctual thing went back to the idea of wanting to have a private practice, which I wanted to do for a long time, but was so afraid of doing it because at that point, like I said, this affected me in so many ways, even trusting myself. I was like, I can't run a business. I can't do this on my own. Who's going to want to work with me? Who's going to value me? And what does it mean for me to go into business on my own? And so there was so many like little tests, I would say, that happened where I was terrified. And at the same time, I also knew that if I didn't do it, I was going to continue to stay in this space where I wasn't happy. And so I ended up launching my private practice. I ended up giving myself permission to be myself more. And it started off with little things. I remember one day I had woken up and I was with my partner, and I looked over at him and I was like, do you think that I could be a model? And he's like, yeah. He's like, why not? And I asked him because at that time I had felt like I had such low self-esteem. And for most of my life, I had also felt like people would often bully me for so many reasons. This was like middle school, and then like going into high school, I was always seen as, you're too short, you're too dark. They would say indio in Spanish, which is indigenous, in a negative way. People would tell me that I was too fat, I was too this. And so I think it was a lot of anger for me in feeling like I was still trying so hard to have other people love me. And I think that anger really blew up. And in that moment, I was like, no, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this for other people because it will never end. And, I had a therapist at one point who had said to me, Luis, you could spend the rest of your life trying to please others. They will never be pleased, and you will waste your life. And that always stuck with me because I kept thinking like, that is what I'm doing. And it has not worked. I got my graduate degree. I've gone above and beyond. I'm successful. I'm doing all these things. And none of that has made me happy. And other people still judge me for it. Or other people still, not everyone embraces me. And I realized like, this is not about other people. And so I think that's when I started to really dig deeper. And so the modeling stuff was out of anger for feeling like I never saw anyone like me walking a runway or in magazines or being thought of as beautiful. And I was like, I'm tired of this. Like, I am beautiful. I do love myself. I know that. And yet I keep telling myself I don't, because other people have told me I'm not good enough and I need to be good enough before I can do these things. So having a very supportive partner who has been right by my side. We've been together now for 13 years, going on 14 this November. He was like, yeah, babe, I think you can be. And he actually went with me to the MAC store to get makeup. And I remember we got in there, and it was my first time ever walking in there because I was so terrified of actually giving into this idea that I could do makeup. And I was that person that would watch like the influencers, on Instagram and stuff, like doing makeup. And I'd be like so envious and still feel like I couldn't do that. And so I remember when he took me in, we saw the different colors, and I was just like, I was like a kid at a candy store, like, oh my gosh, this color, this color, this color. I had a really great experience, and I always share this with people because I think it was part of my anxiety. I thought when I went in there, people were gonna look at me or almost judge me. But the girls that were working at the one that I went to were so sweet, and they were like, you know what, I think this color goes with your skin tone. And they were trying it on me and like telling me, oh my gosh, you look good. And it made me feel so like welcome, that I remember I took like 10 lipsticks and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna take all of these. It was like 10 or 20. And you know, at that time I didn't know like colors or any of that. I was still just so excited to like start doing something different. And if you see a lot of my content on Instagram from when I first started, you'll see that I was just trying stuff on. I was caking it on. I was playing with it because I really wanted to feel like I could do that, right? Like I could also play with this, and I don't have to be perfect or look a certain way. And I felt like a kid. And presently at this time, I'm doing a lot of work on like inner child work. And I realized that was part of that. Me being able to engage in play and exploration and actually do these things that I wanted to do for so long was healing, because I gave myself permission. I said, it's okay for you to do that. And from there, it just kept growing. I started to do photo shoots. I started to get into fashion. I look back sometimes and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I wore that. But I laugh because I'm always telling myself like, Luis, that was the magic happening. You were trying to learn about yourself and embrace yourself. And yes, you probably wore things, made a lot of mistakes with the makeup that you don't do now, but that was the growth. And so for me, it's always kind of like that joy of seeing where I was to where I am now. And all of that, I think all of that has been so crucial to where I am at now, where I still have a lot of self-doubt. I'm still working through a lot of fear. I still work through my anxiety, but I no longer do it in a way where I feel like I have to hide myself. I do it in a way where I'm really taking care of myself. I'm allowing myself to feel these emotions and to acknowledge that it's not me, right? That I do live in a world where I'm not welcomed, where many of us who are queer are not welcomed, where we're not appreciated, where we can turn on the news and hear about anti-LGBTQ plus legislation, or we can hear about someone being affected by violence, right? Or people getting killed. I mean, so many different things. So I think for me, like I'm acknowledging that it was never me. It was really the world. And so now I don't let that stop me. And so I think that's been kind of the transition from before, where it was all about survival, to now for me, it's really about thriving.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing all that. There was a few moments that like the alignment of both of us, of our experiences, is so right here, like parallel. Personally, like what was the hardest part for me, also like coming from a religious background, was like unpacking those narratives that I was trying to fit in to be loved, and realizing I was having no trust in myself, because point blank, I was abandoning myself. So I already don't have these safe spaces to be myself, but I'm trying to fit in those places, which is hard. And I want to ask you, like, how did you unpack those things? Like, how did you silence those voices in your head that are being like, no, you need to be more masculine, you need to be this? What were those narratives that were coming your way, and how did you unpack those?
Yeah, no, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your experience, because I definitely resonate with that. I was the same. I think for me, I didn't trust myself, right? Because no one ever told me that I could trust myself. I grew up being told to trust God, to trust the church, to trust my parents, to trust my teachers, to trust this, and that. But I was always discouraged from trusting myself, whether it was from, you don't know, that maybe that's not how you really feel, or things will change, or how do you know, that I didn't realize how those early narratives around myself really got internalized. And that was basically essentially the main piece of what shifted, was that I learned to trust myself. Even when I launched my private practice, it was the first time that I actually went against what other people were telling me. Like, I remember my parents going like, why are you going to do that? You have a job at Kaiser. You're getting paid so well. We've seen your office. That's like the best you can do. You're making 6 figures. Yeah, blah, 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 blah. They're like, you have great benefits. Like, they were so like confused. And I remember like just thinking like, they don't know, right? They're not coming in and having to be present in this work. And I reminded myself, Luis, like, this is a response you've gotten from them almost your whole life, is questioning your choices, is questioning your feelings. It's almost like gaslighting, right? Yeah. And you know, and they're super conservative. And, you know, my relationship with my parents is very, very complex. I will say that it's changed over time, but they're still very conservative and very religious. And so there's a lot of stuff where I've had to accept that they're not going to understand or even want to understand. And so I've learned to remind myself that I'm not more valid, or that I'm not depending on their acceptance for this anymore. That I love them, and the only thing I ask from them is respect. And when they're not able to do that, then I've had to rely on a lot of different strategies, right? Whether it is going no contact with them for a bit, or whether it is setting stronger limits and boundaries. But a lot of what they would do growing up was really centered around that anxiety themselves, right? There was a lot of fear for them. They were undocumented for a really long time. They were the first in their families to come to the US when they were like 13 years old. So they had a lot of fear of what other people thought, a lot of fear of the police, rightly so, a lot of fear of not having job stability, a lot of fear of not having access to resources or even medical or any of these things. So there was a lot of fear with them. And so we were constantly told to seek safety. Right. And safety was basically like you get a good job, you go to school, you get married, you work really hard. That was the gold standard for them. And so whenever anything deviated from it, it was just almost an instant reflex for them, right? Of no, like you can't do that. And so my whole life, because I was always different, I got a lot of that. Don't walk like that. Don't talk like that. Oh, you shouldn't like that color. Oh, you know, are you sure that's how you feel? A lot of questioning, right, around things, and always like, be obedient. And so, I mean, those are things that they get stuck inside of you, right? And so for me, it was like people pleasing, essentially, right? I had to become this person that was pleasing everyone because I wasn't taught what it felt like to choose myself and to deal with discomfort, right? Especially when it came to other people. And so having to unpack and unlearn that was so difficult at first, because it almost felt like a betrayal to my parents, to the religion that they had given me, to the advice, to a lot of things that had already been inside of me, that oftentimes it was a struggle of, if I trust myself, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm making the wrong choice? And so working through that was the scariest, and also it took a lot of time. And so I always tell people, you know, this wasn't an overnight thing. This show has gone on, you know, a while, and it's just kind of been, you know, moving in a direction, I think, that has allowed me to really embrace myself as human and understand that this is lifelong, that I'm not going to reach a point where I'm healed or everything's perfect. No one is, right? Because we don't work that way. We are, as long as we're alive, right? We're living in the world. We're navigating a lot of different things at the same time. Systems of oppression, family, I mean, so many things, right? We're always going to be growing and evolving and changing. And so I think that for me, that was also pivotal in realizing that I will still be doing this work, and it's not 24/7. It will come when it needs to. And right now I'm in the space of really learning to trust myself more, and it's specifically around my abilities. So I've gone from like, okay, you know who you are, to really having to push away these narratives around what it meant to be, what it means to be queer, what it means to be gay, what it means to not exist, right, in this like binary, especially with religion always butting its head in. There was a lot of guilt and shame that was, you know, had to work through that in therapy, which was extremely helpful, just being able to talk about it. And then I think the part that allowed me to really own it was that I call it what it is now, which is religious trauma. And that is what I experienced. I think for a long time, I felt guilty about saying that, because I thought, oh no, these were things that were good and holy, but they were used as weapons against. And and I struggled with that so much, because I would see people talk about it, and see conversion therapy. I'd see a lot of these religious messages, and I would be like, I don't want to call it that, because was this really what happened to me? And then I sat there in therapy once, and I was like, you know what? Like, yeah, it was traumatic. It was traumatic to be taken into these spaces without being told what was going on. It was traumatic to have people prey on me and make me sound like there was something wrong with me and forgot to fix me. There was something that traumatized me in the words my parents used to describe queer people and me specifically. And it brought up so much pain and anger and so many things that I didn't know where I felt them, but I didn't have names for them. And that was the first time I felt ownership of it, where I was like, this is the pain that was there. And I learned to not hate it, because I realized, like I said, once again, that this was a part of me and this was something that was given to me. Because I think I was so scared of just being angry forever, and so scared of just feeling like that was it. That was my narrative. You know, I was like, I can't, especially because, like I said, my parents are still there. And, you know, it's what's kept us from having the relationship that I wish I could have with them. And so I have to remind myself, I can't let that take ownership of me. I'm taking ownership of it. This is what I got. And then now I know I have terms, and I turned it into something else, right? Which is why I dedicated my practice and my work to helping other queer folks, to specializing in this specific area of mental health, but also doing talks, also showing up as myself, also being a mentor, and hopefully getting to queer elderhood, you know, at some point. A little young for it now, but I do want to get there. But just things that I think that are going to be the outcome that I'm wanting it to be, rather than letting the anger and the pain hold me back. It's turned into love and into really this opportunity for me to finally let myself shine and let myself be the gift that I want to see.
That's so beautiful. I got a little emotional while you were talking about a lot of this, like religious trauma and all this different things, and also talking about you becoming a people pleaser through all of these narratives that you were trying to fit in. And I too am guilty of being a people pleaser. And I'm trying to do the work of choosing myself. I am currently also in that work. And what I have found is that there's like a certain discomfort that comes with choosing myself. I almost am like, should I say that? Or when I do choose myself, sometimes it feels like it comes off as anger, or like people who are not used to me choosing myself and are used to that of me being a people pleaser, like kind of like turn their head like, wait a minute, what? So what I want to know is like, how do you get that discomfort? And if you do, how do you move past that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, it's so interesting, because I would say most folks engage in people pleasing because socially, right, and culturally, we are taught to think about others more than we think about ourselves, right? A lot of times we're actually encouraged to think about everyone else's feelings, and we're often not really encouraged to consider our own wants and needs. We usually call it selfish. And it's funny because whenever I'm working with someone and we're working around like people pleasing and setting boundaries and limits, the biggest feeling that comes up for them is, I feel selfish. I feel
absolutely.
Like, yeah, and I felt it too. And that's a discomfort, right, of almost going against like this value you were given and seeing it in very black and white, either this or that. I'm selfish or I'm not. And the reality is that it doesn't work that way. I've had to learn that there are many things that I used to call selfish that are not selfish. And for a long time, they did feel that way, right? Resting was one of those big ones. I often felt like if I ask for rest, or if I need to take time for myself, if I'm sick or something happens like that, I'm being selfish because I'm not thinking about, how it's going to affect so-and-so, whatever. And I had to really learn that it was okay, that it happens, that we get sick. We have really hard times where we need to also take breaks. And that was something I had to remove myself from, right? That idea that this is selfish. Other things as well, saying no, that was like the scariest one for me. Like I used to hate saying no because it felt like, whenever, and growing up, we never said no to my parents. If we said no, like, no, you got a response. And so you learned, right? Saying no means people get displeased, and they may not react the way my parents did, but it will be the same feeling of disappointment that shows up because I'm not doing what someone else is asking of me. And so I was taught that that was the only way that people would like you, that people would appreciate you, and also that people would see you as a good person, right? If you please, 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 please. And so I had to really unlearn that and accept that there was going to be a lot of discomfort when it comes to not being a people pleaser. And if we think about it, people pleasing essentially oftentimes is a survival strategy, right? A lot of people engage in it for different reasons, right? Especially folks who might have come from spaces where there was a lot of DV, right? Domestic violence, or where there was a lot of other types of psychological, emotional abuse, right? Where people pleasing was what got you through it, right? You didn't have to deal with the consequences or the outcome. And so for me, when I work with folks, I try to really dig deep into the idea of people pleasing and not see it at the surface level, right? Because there's a lot of pop psychology out there where you kind of get like these kinds of like tips and stuff. But the reality is that many people who struggle with it, where it's affecting them to the point of impacting their mental health, it's usually trauma related, or there's something else there, childhood stuff, or even the anxiety, right, that they might experience around what would it mean if I say no? How would this affect me, right? And for a lot of people, this happens during our development, right? Where this happens in school, it happens when we're at work, right? Like how many of us don't get that anxiety around like even work, like saying no or putting ourselves first, right? Oh my gosh, I'm going to get fired. I'm going to end up homeless. Oh my gosh, this person's not going to like me anymore. Oh my gosh, and so people pleasing is a functional strategy, right? It does do something for us. And at the same time, it also can have an impact on us if it's the only thing we're using, right? Because then we're also ignoring ourselves. And so for me, it was having to learn a lot of that, and also acknowledging that I can't show up or be there for others or even do any of these other things if I'm not taking care of myself, if I'm not learning to take care of myself. And part of that included saying no. Part of that included also prioritizing myself when I needed to. I was sharing earlier about working at Kaiser, where I often felt sick because of the prediabetes and not asking for those days or even going to the doctor because I thought, oh my gosh, if I go, I'm going to miss clients. What is my boss going to say? What's this and that? And then ending up getting sicker, and then having to be forced into this and struggling with that. There were so many moments where I had to really learn that this is not about being selfish. This is also about practicing self-love, right? And really acknowledging that we are part of the communities we serve. We're also part of the world. We're also human. And so the same grace that I would give to my clients, I started to really practice that with myself and just being very transparent. And so, lots of little things like that, where I've had to really challenge it. But it took a lot of time. And I think now I'm in a place where it's definitely easier. And there's definitely moments where it's still very anxiety inducing, but I like to really check in with myself and remind myself like, hey, this is part of that process. And I have strategies, talking to my partner, doing some deep breathing, reading, watching my favorite show, listening to music, lots of things that kind of help me through that process of like, okay, this is going to be hard, but once I get it done, can I just give myself a moment, really acknowledge the feelings, and then continue on, because what else can I do? And so it helps me to put it in context, for myself.
Thinking about all of this work you've done over all of these years, and the fact that you've had the same partner for 13 years throughout this whole thing, like blows my mind, because I'm always in this mindset of this work I can't do in partnership because I'm too much in the people pleasing of my partner that I often forget about myself. So I just want to talk about a little bit of the patience and the beauty that your partner has to stick with you through that, because the current partner I have is very much sticking with me through it and being very patient. Yeah. But you've had this partner for 13 years. I'd really love to talk about maybe a little bit of how that was for y'all. Yeah. Of you going through this.
Yeah. I'm a firm believer in love just being so powerful. I know that there's a lot out there about you got to love yourself first, this and that. And I don't think it's the question of what came first, right? The chicken or the egg kind of deal. I think that it's really understanding that we grow through relationships primarily, because we have to remember when we're brought into this world, we can't survive unless we have people we depend on, right? To be fed, to be taken care of, to be taught and socialized. People are literally interacting with us from the moment we're born. I mean, even before we come out of the womb, right? For many of us, we hear about our parents singing to us or talking to us or prayers or whatever it is. We're already being socialized. And so there is no way that we are going to learn to love ourselves unless we have a bilateral effect, right? Where we're learning through others and then learning through ourselves. And so I always tell people, you're going to learn about love in general. You're going to learn so many things in relationships and connections. And I'm not just talking about romantic, also friendships and family. And you're also going to learn a lot on your own, right? Because I think in my experience and in my life, I've had moments where relationships, maybe not in the moment, had taught me so much until later on I was able to really take that and practice it for myself. And then I've had moments like, for example, with my partner now, where I have learned a lot through him. I've learned more patience. I've learned to slow down. I've learned to not just think about myself. I've learned to be more self-aware. I've learned to be more patient and we're not perfect. And I always tell this to folks. So they're always like, what's your secret? I'm like, honestly, there is no secret. It has been a lot of just really wanting to grow together and really seeing each other's humanity. And I think what has helped is that we complement each other personality wise. He is a Capricorn. He's very organized. He's very structured. He's very intelligent. I'm a Cancer. I'm very emotional. I'm very much about my feelings. I'm very communicative. I'm very expressive. And we support each other in that way. I'm a dreamer. He gives me like the detail. Okay, well, this is what you want. How are we going to get there? So he kind of keeps me grounded. And then for him, I've helped him feel like he can dream and think about things that are bigger while still maintaining his, need for having structure. And so it's interesting because I don't know a lot about horoscopes, and I honestly am not someone that can read you or tell you a lot of these things. But what I have learned, at least from the curiosity around us, is one, that we're considered the mom and dad of the zodiac signs. Capricorns are like, and the dads, and Cancer's the mom, or kind of thing. And so I read a lot of these things, and they actually say that they're one of the most compatible signs, which I thought was really interesting because I never paid attention to it until maybe a few years ago, where I was like, oh, I wonder why people keep saying that. And I started reading about it, and I was like, okay, maybe it is our energy, maybe it's our personality, maybe it's our upbringing, but we're very opposite. And I think that's also helped us to really learn from each other. And so for me, when I think about love, I don't feel like I had to learn to love myself before I was able to love him. It actually all happened in a mix, that I started the work to really want to love myself. And then through him, I had someone that was validating, that didn't judge me. When I told him about the makeup, he was open to it. When I told him about the fashion, he was open to it. People often see us when I'm doing shows or when I'm modeling or when I'm doing fashion photo shoots, and he's fixing my lipstick, or he's like telling me, oh, I don't like how this looked at me. What if you try it this way? And people are like, oh my gosh, like you guys like work so well together. And I always tell people, I think that's what has from the get-go been a green flag for us, that when we met, that was something that really aligned, that it just felt like teamwork, right? It just felt like, okay, let's support each other. And of course, obstacles come in, life happens, family stuff, personal stuff, loss, life. And I think for us, what has maintained us has been that we both have been open to learning. And he spent a long time telling me, I don't want to go to therapy. I don't need to go. And now he's in therapy, which is the funniest thing, because he was so close to it for a long time. And he was finally like, you know what? Okay, I think I'll give it a try. And now he's like, oh, I love going to therapy. And I'm like, great. That's awesome.
That is so crazy, because I was the one who was so closed off to therapy. I had really bad experiences. And Rafaela was very encouraging to get back into it, that I can find one that works out well for me. And now we both be in therapy, talking about our sessions, breaking it down and processing it together. And I think that goes to show that our differences are also our strengths.
With me, he's planning. Like, I'm that person that just loves to do things, so I don't think about details, and he's helped me be more organized and just more structured. I have my like Google Sheets now, and I'm like, okay, you know what, like, remember to add this, babe, when you round up, wait till you don't round up, you're like guesstimating, maybe you should like, I'm like, okay, fine. And so, you know, we help each other in those little ways, and I think we make a great team, and that's kind of what really helped us a lot, plus really the communication and also acknowledging a lot of our own backgrounds. I remember when we started dating, one of the biggest things we said to each other was like, we don't want to be like our parents. I told him about my parents. I told them about their relationship, about a lot of the resentment, a lot of the jealousy, a lot of the stuff that I was exposed to, that I had to help my mom and dad cope with because, you know, being the oldest, I was triangulated in so many ways. He shared with me his experience of coming from two homes, separated parents and half siblings, and a lot of these narratives. And I think that really helped us a lot, was understanding where we were both coming from. That some things didn't make sense to me when he would do certain things, and other things didn't make sense to him when I would do certain things, but they didn't have to make sense. I think what helped was having empathy for knowing what he had experienced and his own version of coming out and being himself and how he sees himself. And then me and my own version, and not questioning, right? Or judging and being our parents, but instead being curious and open. And so our relationship has evolved in many ways. It's not where it was when we first met, and it definitely is not going to stay where it's at. And I think for me right now, I just have a lot of appreciation and a lot of gratitude for him. And I know he feels the same for me. And so I think that is something that really helps, is acknowledging those human components and also realizing that this is a choice. Right. I think different from my parents, where they saw it as we committed, we're stuck together forever. I tell him, I would love to spend my life with you. And yet also, I would never want you to feel like you have to do that. I want it to be because we both want to. And so up to this point, we would check in. Sometimes we'll actually ask, like, how do you feel? Like, oh, I love being in the relationship. Great. You know, and if it's not, we'll talk about it. You know, what's coming up and like, what do we need to do? And that has helped me so much as someone who had so much anxiety when it came to relationships because of abandonment, right? Like with my own parents, like thinking if I show myself, they're not going to love me anymore. And it did happen. It happened multiple times, you know, where I shared with them little pieces of me and there was rejection. And so with him, that was the healing part, was having a relationship where it wasn't rejection. It was actually, yeah, like, how can I help you? And it was like, oh my gosh, like someone that loves me and actually wants to help me or actually believes in what I'm doing. It was so different. So yeah, definitely a lot of learning on my own, and then also through the relationship and through friendships, because I have many wonderful friends who are therapists and also who are not therapists, who I've practiced a lot more of the vulnerability and a lot more of having deeper relationships. And their work, all of them, they do require an exchange, right, of energy. And it's not always 50-50. And so it's a lot of communication. It's a lot of self-awareness. It's a lot of uncomfortable moments. I had friends where we noticed things, we called it out, we had crying sessions, and then I noticed our relationship got better afterwards. But it was because we put in the work. I think even that version of love really taught me about friendship and about connection and things that I struggled with because I was still struggling with having a relationship with myself, where now I'm also more patient with myself. I'm also more transparent. I'm also more empathetic towards myself. And I'm also more real with myself when, you know, when I'm getting out of hand.
And what does that support look like for you coming from relationships outside of your partner?
I have so many friends who, aside, you know, from my partner, were also super supportive, who came over to do my makeup and teach me, who would go shopping with me when I was trying to try on clothes so I wouldn't be alone. So many people. And I think that's the other part of the relational piece that I was referring to, is that there's going to be a lot of people that we don't get to choose. And, you know, like I said, with my parents, there is definitely love, but there's also an understanding of grief, right? Of something that I won't go back to have. It's not going to happen. And yet the people in my life right now have been so intentional and so crucial, because now I'm, you know, choosing, and also we're in relationships that feel feel loving and, supportive. And so I've had friends who've flown down to go to my fashion shows, because they know I'm starting off and they want to be there. I've had friends who have celebrated their engagements, right, and their weddings, and we connect all the time. And so those relationships where I've had the most uncomfortable moments that because with my parents, we never had these kinds of moments. It was so much avoidance that now with these friendships, actually talking about the stuff that comes up, I hated it for so long that now I realize how much it's made a difference, because those uncomfortable moments were what really showed us that we cared about each other and that we wanted what was best. And with so many of them, I was able to, have those almost like those healing moments of, this is what it feels like when you feel safe with someone and you can talk about these things. So I have my squad, as they say, my friends who are always there, who I reach out to any type of announcement, and with them the same, some of them are going through their own stuff, breakups, and we're there and we're all checking in and we're planning, how can we be there for them? So it's beautiful. It's honestly a very different form of relationship. So it makes a big difference, especially coming from the other side, right? Where it didn't feel that way.
Well, we created a segment just for you. It's kind of like the red light, green light game, but we're doing green flags and red flags. You're seeing people on social media and dating profiles, which I know you and I are off the market. But if you could name 3 green flags and 3 red flags when it comes to connections, not necessarily just romantic, it could be also like friendship. A green flag for me is something like that thirst for unlearning and learning that brings you closer to authentic self. That's a green flag. Whereas like red flag is like somebody that I feel like is on like emotional eggshells. I have to like be careful what I say around them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I love that. Let's see. I'll start with the 3 red flags. So for me, at least what I've learned and a lot of my, connections, whenever I meet someone that is not open to having deeper conversations, that's a red flag for me. I say that because oftentimes we have to realize that in any relationship, there's going to be conflict. And when you're not willing to really address the conflict, then it's saying that you're not really willing to dive into the relationship in that way. So red flag for me, somebody doesn't want to have the conversation, the follow-up, or wants to avoid, or just no judgment. It just means maybe this is not the relationship that we need or want. Another red flag is people who are overly critical. I've ran into people who criticize everyone, everything, and I see the pain for them internally of what's happening. But I'm not someone that likes to go around criticizing. And obviously I'm human. It's going to come up in my head too. But I'm able to calm myself in, and be like, okay, what is that about? Why are you being so judgy? Oh, maybe you're a little jealous. Okay, yeah, you know what? Maybe I am a little jealous. Okay, I can acknowledge that. What do I need to do for me and stay in my lane? And so for me, that's another red flag when someone is just everything is a criticism, a judgment, everyone's, awful. Third red flag I'm going to say is when folks don't want to say that something is going on and instead use a lot of gaslighting. That to me, and I see it, there's something happening, and no matter what, it's like such almost like an avoidance of actually saying. And I think doing the work that I do, I've learned to really read between the lines a lot of times. So sometimes I'll even point it out and they're like, oh, yeah, I guess, I didn't want to say it. I'm like, well, now we're kind of dancing around each other because you don't want to say it. You don't think I want to hear it. So I think that's the other thing, the last red flag for me. Green flags. I love when people cheer each other on. I think that's such a great green flag. When you have someone in your life or friendship, partner, whatever, that just cheers you on and you feel it, like they show up, like to me and it is not like every time, right? I mean, they don't have to like do it, but you see it. I have friends who couldn't go to something and they're like, hey, I just want to say, congratulations. I'm really proud. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like they're thinking about me. Like to me, that's a green flag. And I love doing that for other folks too, where I love to reach out. Like even if I can't make it to something, happy birthday. I hope you have an amazing day. I saw you. Your outfit looked fire, you look great. Or, hey, I just heard that you launched your so-and-so. I just want to say congratulations, let me know if you need any support. Or even just like acknowledging, right? Like, hey, I know last time you wanted to check in and I didn't have a chance to. I just wanted to come back and touch base, or like, come back to what we talked about. I think for me that the follow-up is a green flag when people are able to do that. Another green flag for me would be people being able to use humor, or just using humor in a relationship that's healthy. Like, and when I say healthy, I mean humor in the sense that like, it's really about feeling good. And I'm someone who loves to use humor. I grew up in a home where like we're always laughing. So even with a friend, we might be talking about a topic that's a little stressful, and like we just start laughing about something. Like I had a friend who told me the other day, I'm dealing with so much, Luis, like I dropped my phone in the toilet and my first thing was like, oh, was there pee in the toilet? They start laughing. They're like, no comment. I don't want to talk about it. And then we're just both like dying of laughter. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, and we totally, like it helps. And we just like, are able to like then get into this other place of like, okay, we're using humor, humanizes this, and then we sit there, and if they have to cry, they cry, and if we have to laugh about it, we laugh about it, but we hold space. And so I think humor in that way is something that I see as a green flag. When people use it in a lighthearted but also a very like connective way. And the last one for me, I would say, is when folks are willing to learn. And I say this because I think so many people are so resistant to acknowledging, when we make mistakes. I think everyone is, right? It's hard to acknowledge it. But when I see like people who even just say, you know what, I'll think about it, or let me reflect on it, or hey, and then they come back and they can at least have the dialogue, to me that means so much. And so I think being able to acknowledge, right, our humanness rather than going with pride, right, or that unwillingness, right, to really acknowledge, right, that we can grow. Those are green flags for me.
I love that. I loved all of those. Those are really on point. A few of mine, I wrote out a couple for myself, but I was like, oh, I'll use these examples. And some of yours aligned really well with mine.
What were yours? Yeah. I want to hear that.
Oh, shoot. Okay. Well, first off, oddly enough, I started with the green flags first, but I'll do the same way. I'll do my red flags first and then green. The first one I had wrote was just like how when people don't validate your feelings, and when you're talking to them and kind of like, this is what's going on, or any kind of conversation that you have, you're being really careful because they might explode on you or get offended or get in an angry or sad space, like those emotional like eggshells that I'm a very like unfiltered person because I was raised as a kid very filtered. So now I'm just like, I have a respect filter, but at the same time, it's just, I don't want to have to be careful all the time of what I say around someone. Yeah. And then another one is like, for instance, if I'm sick and my partner goes out with her friends and I'm like, cool, just bring me home medicine, comes home with no medicine. It's a very particular one, just kind of like that selfishness where it affects someone else. Also, like when you're being a people pleaser and giving help to somebody, and then somewhere in that it turns to entitlement for the receiver, and then when you're no longer willing to help them, they respond with anger. And it's just like, wait
the passive aggressiveness a little bit, or like kind of just like what is it?
Exactly, yeah. And then kind of just like, no, I need you to help me like this, not like that. And I'm just like, wait a minute, whoa.
Yeah.
And then the green flags is I really love when we can have like an open dialogue where there's no judgments, and that if there are any judgments coming on, just, hey, like communicating, I'm feeling like this is what's coming up. Is this what your intentions are? And that both sides can be like, no, actually, this is what it is. And clear that up so the judgment goes away and the conversation can just be had. That makes sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, the judgments, right? I mean, we all have biases, right? They get in the way and they can become roadblocks if we're trying to have deep conversations, right? Because they're like the negative thoughts, right? Just kind of showing up, and it doesn't allow us to just be transparent.
Yeah. And then sometimes when you don't know the other side of someone else, you build this own narrative in your brain. And then sometimes you have to clear that. Yeah. You're like, wait a minute, let's clear this up before. The other green flag is like that thirst for the unlearning and the learning that like brings you closer to yourself. And like people reading things that change their perception of, oh, okay, like I could chill on that for now.
Yeah.
And like the last green flag is that willingness to hear your faults.
Yeah.
And to have like a calm head while you're hearing the faults and being able to discuss through them. And it aligned with what you had said of coming back and then discussing it and breaking it down.
I was going to say our green flags are pretty on point for like both of us. And it's personal too, right? I think that's the other thing. I think when we think of red flags, green flags, there's some universal ones, but also it's going to vary, right? For so many of us and our pet peeves, but also some things that we're more patient with or more open to. And we all have different stories and different backgrounds. And so some are going to be more than others, right? Like you were sharing about the medicine one. I know for a lot of folks that it's a reminder, right, of being ignored in other situations or not feeling like appreciated, right? If someone says something and they don't follow through, right, it doesn't feel good. And for other people might be like, oh, no biggie, that's fine. But I mean, I think it's so personal too when we're talking about these things, just like limits and boundaries. I always tell folks like limits and boundaries are there to protect us, but they also change, right, depending on trust, depending on the relationship, depending on a lot of other factors. So, I'm glad that we got to share some of our own, and I noticed the alignment. So,
yeah, definitely. So, I have one last question before we wrap this all up, and that's if you could describe radical acceptance and self-care in one word, phrase, or mantra, what would it be?
Wow. Ooh. I would say freedom. Freedom, because that is what I've been feeling since 4 years ago when I finally decided. And I say decided because I like I said, for a long time, it felt like it was a survival piece. But then me choosing to really embrace myself and allow myself to be me, it was the most freeing moment. And that's how I continue to feel. I feel free. I don't feel like I am existing or living or doing for anyone else, but for myself, with the intention and the hope that there are also other people who get inspired and who also connect and who also feel seen through that work that I'm doing.
It's beautiful. Thank you for being here today. And how can people find you on Instagram or Twitter or whatever these kids are on these days?
I was gonna say it's X now because formerly Twitter. I know. Oh my gosh. Thank you first of all, thank you for the invite again. It's such a pleasure speaking with you and also just being in this space with you. And for folks who do want to connect with me, I am on Instagram. That's the main platform I'm on. And that one is at Luis, LUIS _ the THEE and then _ LMFT. And that's where I put all my content and all my stuff for announcements and things that I'm doing. So I have a website that's www.luis-cornejo, CORNEJO.com. And then people there can see my portfolio, my work, interviews, things that I've done like that. And yeah, you can also find my candle there, find my podcast, Queer Magic, on there as well. And I'm always open to connecting with folks or other opportunities as well, right? To be able to do this work that I do in advocacy and especially around like queer folks and our mental health. So yes, I'm definitely welcoming everyone who aligns or who feels connected to it to reach out.
Well, and we'll have all of those in the show notes just in case you're driving or washing dishes or doing something where you couldn't write that down. Thank you again, Luis. It was such a pleasure having you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, V.
We have so much more to explore and share with you on the pod. Tap that follow or subscribe button to get every episode as soon as it's released. And give us a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And join our wellness community on Instagram at Quest Wellness Pod. This podcast was produced by Puka Puka Creative. Executive producer, Stevie Kwok. Producer, editor, and sound designer, Leah Jackson. Associate producer, Rafaela Landestoy. Original music produced by Basque. His music is amazing. And we can't forget the emotional support by our fur babies, Frankie, Nugget, and Pukalani.
We'll cry and we'll like talk about
Girl, you're a Cancer. Yeah. Same.
Oh my gosh, that's what my partner says all the time. He's like, I'm a Capricorn. I'm like, oh my gosh.